for you again another Pokemon Creepypasta. So today we're going to be reading the Easter egg on Snow on Mount Silver. Alright. So my brother and I, we kind of grew up on Pokemon. Around here, a lot of kids did. It worked out perfectly for us too, because every time a new gen game came out, one of us would get one version and one of us would get the other. And since our mom liked to spoil us, we both got the third one. This is going to sound at first like a bittersweet story about two siblings who grew up with a couple of games that eventually take them down two different roads. Well, it's a little more than that. The years rolled by. We kept collecting. Game Boys got old and we replaced them. Cartridges finally gave out and we picked up new copies. But we started down two completely different roads before Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald came out. See, around then my brother got a Game Shark. We all heard the hacks and cheats you can do with them, even if we were kind of late to the party, and they sounded awfully cool. Our first guinea pig cartridge was my brother's old blue version. We just dicked around with it a little bit, nothing major, but whenever we did fucked the cartridge up, after just a couple code entries, it glitched out completely and became unplayable. Naturally, we were upset at first, but my brother mourned the loss of his hours of work, and I was sympathetic. I told him, it's okay, we can replace it, I guess. Stupid Shrek was a waste of money. But here in our past, we finally differed. After seeing the mess it had turned Blue's version into, I had become opposed to the idea of hacking or cheating any of my games. What can I say? I'm a chick, and I have feelings for the little pixel critters. At least with the Game Shark, but my brother had taken his game's destruction as a personal challenge or something. I don't think he ever played a game which wasn't hacked somehow. Yeah, we played a shit ton of Pokemon, man, but for us, there wasn't really much else to do. We live out in the country without many other kids, and the farmers didn't want us on the property. So we played Pokemon out on the lawn just about all day, every day. It was pretty awesome to us, at least. We lost the Game Shark when our rooms got moved around, and a new addition was built into our home, and it disappeared in the mess of shit that had got stuffed into the new closet. Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald arrived, and after playing through them once, we were both in agreement that we were definitely lacking in comparison due to the last gen. We both tried another honest playthrough, and though we managed to finish, it left us both yearning for some good old-fashioned nostalgia. Where we were our gold, silver, and crystal cartridges, though. It took us probably a month to dig through the boxes that we've been too lazy to open up before, but we finally found one of the shitload of our old electronics. My purple Game Boy Color still worked, and his red one would no longer hold batteries in place. Both of our Game Boy GBAs were fine, though, along with our snake lights and link cables. That one with the little nifty connector in the middle that I always had wrapped up oh so carefully to avoid fraying the wires and condemning it to the trash like our last cable. We both grabbed up everything we could, and it was just so nice to have yellow, which had been my first and most cherished game of the series, not just Pokemon, and red and gold back. I went through the motions of checking our old files, taking in the old memories, and eventually we figured that Gen 1 stuff was too nostalgic to get rid of. So I restarted Gold and he restarted Silver. Immediately he snatched a Game Shark out of his box and slipped it to his back of his GBA, and I just shook my head at him, remember what I just said to him. The thing will kill your game, you know. He never had liked me preaching to him about abusing pixels, so I shut my mouth after that, but it had put him off from playing with me. I guess it was just one time too many or something, so I ought to keep my thoughts to myself, really. It was a couple days later that it happened. I was out on the porch, Game Boy in hand, just about to go into the Elite Four when I realized I needed a little bit of help. My team was ill-balanced thanks to my playthrough of the leisure, and the time I was no great trainer that could pull off gimmick runs. I knew that my brother had been 2 badges ahead of me when we last checked with one another, so I was hoping that maybe he'd let me borrow a Pokemon or two just for this run-through. Now, the thing is that I'd spent the last 24 hours at a friend's place. I had literally come home, dumped my bag in my room, and crept out into the sun with my GBA to play. I had no idea what he had been up to. For all I knew, he was done with the game and onto a new one, which I figured was all better for me since he wouldn't need those Pokemon. I'd stand a better chance of nicking a few. So I got up and went to the house, and I was crossing the living room, and I noticed all of his Pokemon games laying on the floor. Some of the cartridges had been mangled, like they'd been hacked at with something sharp, but even his old blue version, long ago dead, was too sentimental to throw away. It was lying in plastic, rugged, split almost halfway up the side, and completely unusable anymore, even if it would have worked. I was a little scared. This had have to happen in the morning. Otherwise, our mom would have seen, and they wouldn't be lying on the carpet. Tucking my GBA into my pocket, I crept over to his room and found the door unlocked. Somehow, that was even more concerning. I walked in and found My brother sitting on the edge of his bed. His GBA was in pieces on the floor at his feet, smashed into bits. Next to him on the bed was our hammer and our mother's gardening scissors. His face was paler than I ever seen it, even whiter than the time we'd gone corning and the old guy up the street, illegally blind and a raving nutcase, had come across and chased us into the trees with a shotgun. It was now that I noticed the Game Shark on the ground and the silver cartridge poking from under his bed. Somehow they had been spared in the wrath of the hammer. Are you okay? I asked, remembering the chills that ran through me. He was my little brother. Seeing him like this was horrifying. It was awful, I remember him rasping. The way his voice rattled made my knees weak. Oh, God, white everywhere, then black. I remember running over and hugging him, and I remember his limp arm fell and brushed the Game Boy in my pocket, and his sudden scream right in my ear, making me jump and bite my tongue by accident. He ripped the handheld from my pocket and hurled it at the far wall. I cried out at the dent of the plastic system made there and running over to collect it. The screen had gone dark, and though I feared the worst when I flicked the switch on, it powered normally. I waited there in the corner trying to pretend that GBA mattered enough not to go for a run to our mom, and the volume was on. The Pokemon theme started up and he screamed again, picking up the hammer. This time I screamed too, and ran from the room with my GBA clutched to my chest like a shield. He ended up in the psych ward of the hospital for 2 days. Where we went to visit him, I left my GBA at home. No one could figure out what set off his strange manic behavior. There was some talk that I didn't understand at the time about some kind of disorder he may or may not have had, but even though my mom and I had collected and bought in all the cut-up cartridges to be looked at, Mom's idea, not mine, no one even thought to tie it back to the game. Maybe that was my fault. I hadn't said a word about what happened when he had accidentally touched my Game Boy or the blind. White terror he had been throwing into the music had started. On my last visit to the hospital before school on the second day, I was left alone in my room with him while Mom had some private talk with the doctor about precautions to take if this should happen again. I sat in the chair next to the bed where he was staring at the ceiling, but suddenly he sat up, making me flinch. Hey, he told me, Angie, go in my room when you get home. I didn't understand what he meant, and then I remembered the things we hadn't packed up and brought in. The games and the hacking tools were under his bed. Get rid of them. I don't want to play with them ever again. His voice was so weary and desperate. He sounded like an old man on his deathbed. My poor, damaged little brother. How could I refuse? Promise you'll get rid of them. Okay, I promise. I was carried off to school late, and though the whole day I had my promise to him in my head, I didn't know it at the time, but this would have been the last time I could ever play the big sister role and help him out. I just had to get home and get rid of that game, but as the day went on, a sick curiosity started to go through my own head. What could have possibly happened to that game that scared him so badly? I was scared myself, but I just had to know. I had to. I got home and went into his room and bent on uncovering whatever horror was waiting for me. Mom had since vacuumed the room, and the cartridges in the Game Shark were no longer visible. I got down and crawled under the bed, feeling timid, but holding on to the promise I made as my badge of courage. Under the bed, there was enough dust to make me cough, enough old Legos and various other toys that I couldn't set my elbow down without landing on something. But I finally saw both objects. They had been shoved into the corner on top of a notebook that had looked to be too new to have been down here long. Unthinking, I grabbed the corner of the paper and dragged everything out with me, still wheezing from the dust, allergies and all. They looked innocent, simple toys and a simple spiral-bound bunch of papers, but when I set the silver version and the Game Shark on the floor, I took a closer look at the notebook. On it were scrawled at least 20 different cheat codes, but one had been scratched out with Sharpie over where it had been initially drawn in but with pen. This was confusing. Had he really tried to erase it out? The marker had been pressed onto the paper so hard that the ink soaked through most of the pages behind it, almost 2/3 of the way to the cardstock back cover. But pen has a way of sticking around, so I picked up the notebook and tilted it backwards in the light to reflect the surface of the Sharpie, revealed the incidents that had been left where it had written. The code was in an unintelligible mess of letters and numbers, but the words next to it confused me. Easter egg, snow on Mount Silver. I remember what he had said when I found him. He had been raving about the white, and then black. Could he mean snow? Even though it was only August and the temperature was still climbing to 90 degrees every day, a chill ran down my spine. Did I dare? I picked everything up and brought it to my room and laid it out on the carpet in front of me with my own GBA next to it. For a long time I just stared down at it, and the longer I looked, the more maniacal look his face became on the sticker, like some kind of twisted grin. Like it was daring me to find out what happened to my brother. I was a 14-year-old kid. Did I really want to tempt fate and risk ended up like him? I glared down at the Lugia for a while longer. I had to see. I slid gold out of my GBA and stuck silver in its place. It took me almost 15 minutes to compose myself and turn it on. It started up normally, and I left the sound on low, too afraid of what might hear to keep it up the full way, and too curious to turn it the whole way off. The title screen was normal too, Lugia again, but somehow menacing despite my common sense telling me it was exactly the same picture as every other time I had started up the game. How bad could this be, I asked myself. He said the notes of the Easter egg. Did that mean that the coding was already in the game? The menu came up, and it's still absolutely normal. His character was Blake, but with mostly filled Pokédex, but the time was odd. 999.99. I knew he couldn't have been playing that long. I had barely logged 50 hours on my own game, and I was at the Elite Four. And I was playing slowly, probably the result of his hacking fucked up his file, I thought. Well, whatever then. The game started up, and the first thing I noticed was a prolonged black screen. It almost took a minute for anything to change, and there's no sound at all. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing up already, but it was already too late to turn back. Finally, a very dim sort of map came onto the screen, but it looked like static. What was going on? I squinted down to realize with some fearsome pain that it was actually a Mount Silver map. But what I thought was static was falling heavy snow. So this was where he was last saved his game. I checked his party, and a very normal team for someone who'd been using a Game Shark, Typhlosion, Feraligatr, Meganium, Pidgeot, Tyranitar, Lugia, all with level 100 with modded moves. Typical for him. Something about the sprites was strange, though. They had seemed sullen in a way, and their colors seemed washed out, and their expressions lacked the usual vigor they normally had, so I chalked this up to missing pixels or something, and also due to the hacking. The map had brightened up just a smidgen when I closed out of the start menu. Indeed, snow was somehow falling very heavily, and pixels danced around the screen so fast it was hard to see the little sprite that was my brother's character. Something was off about him, too. When I checked the information, it was the same as the Pokemon sprites. The colors were dull. And in fact, now that I thought about it, it almost looked frostbitten. My stomach tightened, and I tried to move back down to the mountain as I hit the bottom of the screen. The words popped up, and there was finally a sound. My sprite hitting an invisible wall. I can't turn back now. This was unsettling. I went to my Pokemon and tried to use Pidgeot's fly ability. I can't fly in this, obviously referring to the snow. Fuck this, I thought, going into his bag. There was an escape rope, so I tried using it. I can't go back anymore. What was going on? Once again, I tried to walk back down the mountain, and to my horror, the words changed with every attempt. I can't run away. I can't back down. I can never go back. The last one sent a frigid feeling through my heart, and there was no way down the mountain. I had to climb, turning the little sprite around, and I moved him forward. No resistance at all, though my walking speed was oddly slow, which was truly weird with the lack of grass on the trainers of anything at all but the white snow, which still blew across the screen and made it almost impossible to see. As I moved further up the mountain, his walking speed became slower and slower. The static current of the pixels grew thicker so that I could barely make out the features of the map, but it seemed like the only way to move was straight ahead anyway. I reached what looked like a set of stairs at the very top edge of the screen. I didn't remember this being here before. As I tried to move up, the little sprite paused. I'm cold. But even now I was getting goosebumps. His walking speed had become painfully slow, as if somehow he was being impeded. Up the little staircase, more text on the screen. Meganium has died. What the fuck? I thought, Pokemon don't die in these games. I checked my party. I was frightened and confused what I saw. Meganium's sprite had been replaced by a red X. All my other Pokemon sported varying degrees of damage, though I hadn't battled once. I went into my bag and found a single revive, and tried to use it. It's too late, it said. What kind of Easter egg was this? There wasn't much else I could do. Trying to turn around yielded the same message as before, so I kept moving. Pidgeot has died. I checked again. Sure enough, there was a little X. This time I selected it and looked at the Pokemon myself, trying to figure out what was wrong. I wish I hadn't. The sprite was mangled, pieces of it were missing, and what was left was spotted with a sickish blue-gray color, as its eyes was solid black pit. I flipped down to the Meganium, same deal, a leg missing, chunk out of its neck, most of its head, and save that pitch-black dead eye. Morbid curiosity urged me onward, and the path never deviated from the straight upward road I'd traveled the entire time. Along the way, every now and then another party Pokemon would die, and examination of its sprite would show that it had the same condition as the others. Until all that was left was Typhlosion. One more staircase was up ahead, and I climbed it, to brace for what the horror awaited me. I hit the summit. It was deserted, and Red was nowhere to be found. The snow had stopped falling. I was in the very center of the map was something sticking out of the snow. It looked like a Pokeball. Okay, maybe this creepy shit led up to something that's climactic. Final battle using for whatever was in there. And if I picked it up, maybe Red would come out of hiding. I walked over and examined it, and there was a burst of static noise before my game made me jump. What appeared on the screen was a battle animation and my trainer sprite appearing, his skin tinged blue against another mangled Pokemon sprite. It was Celebi. In the center of the black hole that was a single red dot burned out like an ember. The thing looked rotted. I didn't even throw out my mostly dead Typhlosion before it had moved. Celebi used Perish Song. A screech came out of my GPA and I almost dropped it as the screen went white. A part of me was relieved thinking that my final Pokemon had been KO'd and I would be transported to a Pokemon Center. But I was wrong. My sprite reappeared in what looked like a cave. Was I now inside the mountain? I checked my trainer card and felt sick. The sprite was just as mauled as a Pokemon had been. A leg gone, a single eye remaining, pitch black, and so sad looking. Tears welled up at the corner, and every color on him was replaced by those six shades of frosty blue and gray. Every stat on the card was reduced to 0, except for the time, which still read 999.99. I quickly moved back to the map, and his sprites there mimicking the horror it had become on the trainer card. Pieces were missing. Everything was discolored. I started trying to walk, and at first I received a message. It's so cold. There was only one direction to go, upward. I moved on, and every now and then would be stopped by a message that made my heart sink lower and lower. Mother, it feels so cold. I can't go on. The walls as I walked became darker and darker until they were pitch black at the end. There was an exit there, marked only by a white outline. I had no other choice but to go through it. It opened to a chamber that was also solid white, and the only way to distinguish the walls was a thin gray line that marked them as separate from the floor. Against the far wall there was another sprite. Red sprite. Intact. I had come this far, and I had to finish this. I walked right up to him and hit A. A battle started. Red sprite had none of the deformities that mirrored my own. The colors were the same, blues and grays, but he was still intact. He just looked extremely sad. His first Pokemon came out, Venusaur. It was just like my own had been, but level 0 with a speck of health. I sent out Typhlosion, who had just had 8 hit points left. No Pokemon made a sound when they were brought into battle. Venusaur used Struggle. There was no animation, just a single point of damage done to Typhlosion, and then the opposing sprite had dropped off the screen. Venusaur has died. There was no text asking me to switch out, and instead there was just what looked to be a dialogue from Red. His next Pokemon was Blastoise. Even more mangled than Venusaur had been, it was too struggled and died. After each round of that was that ominous from the trainer, every sprite was more damaged than the last, and his Espeon was barely distinguishable as a Pokemon. I realized something he was sending out an order in which he was sending them out all in order, which saved one Pokemon for last. I was looking at the sprites over here. It's creepy as fuck. Pikachu came out and it was grotesque. It too was discolored like it was frostbitten, and it was missing an ear, half its body and tail. Its head was mostly intact, but its eyes were much larger than they should have been, and glared out at me like pitch-black windows into hell. But the thing that got to me was the most giant smile that extended almost out to the edges of its head. Its health was somehow at 0, or at least it looked that way. My hands were shaking, and I didn't get a chance to attack. Pikachu used Pain Split. Pikachu has died, and Typhlosion has died. It cut back to the image of Red's sprite, and now it looked like mine. With his body so butchered, it looked like a carcass stripped most of its meat, except it's the same soulless, deranged eyes as Pikachu. I finally understood what's happening. They were dead. And this sub-level of mountain was the hell they now existed in. Red finally spoke. It's over. The screen flashed black and white for a moment. Use Destiny Bond. A horrible, hideous screeching started to issue from my GBA, and the screen went white. And it shrieked at me, and I threw it on the floor and pressed my back against the bed. The horrible noises continued for several moments while the screen stayed white, then went black, then there was silence. It took me a long few moments, but I eventually stood up. I took the Game Shark, I took the notebook, I took out the fucking possessed game, I picked them all up and carried them to the garbage can where I already set out for the morning pickup. At the end of our long, winding driveway, I threw them in. When I got back to the house, I didn't know what made me do it, but I picked up my yellow version and inserted it to my Game Boy. I think there's a part of me still determined to make sure I hadn't somehow been tainted as well. The music started up, the game played, I turned to my Pikachu and hit A. Its smiling face greeted me with an ear twitch and a pixelated smile, a pleasant almost smile. I turned my game off and spent the next hour crying on the floor. My brother and I never did play Pokemon together again. He gave it up for good, and I stuck replaying my comforting unhacked games. That winter, the snow fell thick. Wow, Pokemon games that turn you fucking into a psychopath. That's interesting. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this one. If you're new to my channel, be sure to hit the subscribe button, give it a thumbs up, and the bell so you know if I post videos, which is every Wednesday. I love you guys, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.